The first is freedom of speech and expression everywhere in the world. The second is freedom of every person to worship God in his own way everywhere in the world. The third is freedom from want, which translated into world terms means economic understandings which will secure to every nation a healthy, peacetime life for its inhabitants everywhere in the world. The fourth is freedom from fear, which translated into world terms means a worldwide reduction of armaments to such a point and in such a thorough fashion that no nation will be in a position to commit an act of physical aggression against any neighbor anywhere in the world.
Your Majesty, Your Royal Highness, Mr. President, Mr. Prime Minister, Excellencies, esteemed laureates, members of the Roosevelt family, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Zeeland, the province of the forefathers of the Roosevelt family, and welcome to Middelburg, city of freedom and shelter city for human rights defenders. Let me take you back in time to January 6, 1941. On that day, President Roosevelt articulated his vision for a better world in a speech to the United States Congress. And he described a world founded upon 4 essential human freedoms: the freedom of speech, the freedom of worship, the freedom from want, and the freedom from fear. And this was not a sweet vision of a distant millennium. It was a courageous call to action to break American isolationism during the Second World War. Roosevelt understood that the world order of dictators based on military power had to be opposed by a moral order based on human rights. And so the 4 freedoms became the moral justification for the involvement of the United States in the liberation of Europe from the tyranny of Nazism. And until this very day, we are deeply grateful that so many young Americans answered to this call to action and sacrificed their lives for our freedom. The strife of the 4 freedoms did not end after the war. Thanks to the tireless work of Franklin and Eleanor Roosevelt, the 4 rules-based order. For decades, we prospered while pursuing these freedoms. Cooperation between free countries, working together in a friendly manner, provided wealth, stability, and security. Of course, we knew there were gaps between the rhetoric of the four freedoms and reality. And of course, we knew that the hopes that we were aroused in many hearts by the creation of the United Nations outran the limitations of human nature. But we believed in the righteousness of freedom for everyone, everywhere in the world. And so we committed ourselves to the realization of these freedoms. But this commitment is no longer self-evident. Every day we see how the four freedoms are being weakened by the authoritarian forces in our world, how they no longer respect the rights of the vulnerable, how they no longer try to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war, how they no longer reaffirm faith in the dignity and worth of every human person. It seems we are just at the beginning of that harsh reality. Yet trying as these times might be, they also allow us to see where we have gone astray. For too long, we had thought that the four freedoms were the obvious and only path that world history was on. And we believed that the four freedoms satisfied everyone's desires, that it was just a matter of time before this moral order would bring down all tyrannies in this world. And we had good reasons to believe that. We were used to things getting consistently better over our lifetime. Every year there was more democracy in the world, less poverty, more peace, but our convictions were never really tested. And so we forgot that the course of history does not bend towards the four freedoms unless we stand up for them and are willing to defend them. The rupture in our world order shakes us out of this complacency. It's a wake-up call. And the question is, are we courageous enough to respond to this call? Today, we honor the laureates who show us what courageously responding to this call looks like. The courage to show the people around you that Jews and Muslims can live in harmony and work for a society where anti-Semitism and Muslim hate don't have a place. The courage to defend the right of journalists to report the news safely and speak truth to power when this right is violated. The courage to defend the right of journalists, the courage to call out the persecution of religious minorities by your government and, despite immense personal risks, tell the world about the God you worship. The courage to challenge existing norms around people with disabilities and through activism fight for their rights and dignity. And the courage to shift the blame from victims to perpetrators during a public trial and become a beacon of hope that frees women's voices. And the courage to stand up for your country and say to Russia, we will be defending our country because our weapon is truth. And our truth is that this is our land, our country, our children, and we will defend all of this. We pay the highest tribute to the unwavering courage and enduring perseverance of the Ukrainian people and to the steadfast and resolute leadership of their president, Volodymyr Zelensky. You continue to stand firm in defense of your freedom and sovereignty. And be assured, your struggle is not yours alone. It's a struggle we recognize as our own. It's a struggle that is also about our freedom. And we will remain deeply and enduringly committed. Laureates, thank you for your examples of courage. And may we find ourselves worthy of them by passing on that courage to others. Roosevelt inspired millions to rally for freedom and human rights. And we do the same. We can do the same. You don't have to fly to the ends of the earth to stand up for what is right. Human rights begin in small places, close to home. And you don't have to hold a position of high status to be concerned about your brother and sister. It's about ordinary people doing good to each other in the ordinary course of things. And however old or young you are, however poor or rich, however powerful or powerless, you have a responsibility to seek to make of this world a better place for everybody. So be involved in the struggle for freedom and human rights. And like the laureates, we might have to suffer in this struggle. But let our hearts be consoled by the promise that we shall reap what we sow, and that our hands be guided by the command to overcome evil with good.
No one would want to live like that, repeating the same thing for weeks, months, and of course for years. And yet, that's exactly how we live now. I'm afraid to lose our people, because the people are the most important, because everything is this war for independence of the people.
Того дня, коли він загинув, був такий самий день. Я дуже гарно пам'ятаю свої думки, коли я йшла на роботу. Дивилася, оце небо, воно було таке саме синє, таке саме чисте. День був сонячний, прохолодний. Я пам'ятаю, як я думала, як в такий день можна когось вбивати, як можуть летіти ракети, як можуть стріляти люди в такий день. В мені є безконечна кількість горя. Тому що матері на всіх мовах кричать однаково і плачуть однаково.
Саме головне, щоб наша країна перемогла в цій війні і наступив у них.
Тобто завжди треба такий в душі мати вогник, щоб він тебе зігрівав. І коли ти будеш його мати, цей вогник, він буде зігрівати оточуючих навколо тебе. Це дійсно працює.
На початку війни всі мої друзі роз'їхалися.
At the beginning of the war, all my friends left and I had nothing to do. I was scared to stay at home alone. And I found out that there was a children's theater in Kharkiv. I didn't know about it at all. I came and saw that there were a lot of children here. They were all having fun, playing. And I knew that if anything happened, they would save me because there was a shelter here.
Now, visiting the theater, they mentally survive. But time will pass, and paradoxically, I'm sure that these memories will be some of their happiest. How during the war they played Christmas plays for the whole city in this bunker. We are very alive here in Kharkiv. This is our message to the world.
For us, to survive is a victory. Because we are surviving with our identity, with our country, with our independence.
What an amazing video, and I think it already says it all. What an incredible resilience. President Zelensky, dear Volodymyr, Your Majesty, Your Royal Highness, ladies and gentlemen. Every year, at the 4th Freedom Awards ceremony, we hear extraordinary stories of courage, resilience, and heroism. And today is no exception. And to my mind, these stories show that President Roosevelt was right to prize the 4 freedoms above all else. Because too often we don't notice that those freedoms are under threat until it's too late. And nowhere is that threat clearer than in a war. The fight for freedom is at the heart of the award that I'm privileged to present today to President Volodymyr Zelensky. Since the start of Russia's full-scale invasion over 4 years ago, you, Volodymyr, have been the symbol of that fight for freedom in Ukraine, of the need to defend that freedom with everything you have. And the key message you've emphasized over and over again is that protecting freedom is a duty shared by everyone. Everyone can play their part. And so we see you in the international arena, actively working to exert influence wherever you can. But we also see you visiting the front lines and the sites of bombed buildings anywhere in your country. And above else, we see you among the people of Ukraine. So it speaks volumes that you only agreed to accept this award if you could do so on behalf of all the people of Ukraine. On behalf of all the ordinary men, women and children who were thrust overnight into a new reality they did not choose, but now have to face each and every day. On behalf of the children who now go to school in an air raid shelter. On behalf of the women who keep their families afloat and their country running by working in factories. And on behalf of the men who've had to swap a suit and tie for combat fatigues and are fighting to defend their country. Meter by meter. And they're doing so because they know and feel that every square centimeter is a piece not just of Ukraine's soil, but of its dignity too, of its identity. Its words, songs and symbols and all those other invisible elements that make a people what they are and give a country its future. A future that only they can decide. That is what they are defending. And for anyone like me who has only ever known peace, it's very hard to imagine how you do that and what it must feel like. We're used to books and films about war heroes, and we tend to think about people in real-life war zones in that way. But when I visited Kyiv last month, I saw that heroes are not born heroes. They're just ordinary people. They don't have superpowers or even exceptional talents, or rather that talent is to remain human in an inhuman situation. And I think that's what Eleanor Roosevelt meant when she said that only someone's character is the real criterion of worth. And that's certainly true of the women that I met while visiting a drone factory in Ukraine. Until the war started, they lived their lives as so many women do, pursuing careers, taking care of their families. But when their world changed, they chose to change with it. Now they're working as drone mechanics, a job they probably never heard of until a few years ago, let alone imagine they would be doing. But they made the change. They, for their children at home and for their future. And that same determination is shown every day by Ukraine's emergency workers. Despite shortages of everything, they continue to race to wherever they are needed. And they risk their own lives in the process, because Russian troops are counting on them to show up. After an initial attack, they will often launch a second strike on the same target, hoping to hit as many first responders as possible. When I first heard about this perverse reality, I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what to think, except to wonder how on earth you carry on when you live in such a reality. And yet that is exactly what almost 40 million Ukrainians are doing every day. Ordinary people, getting groceries for their neighbors, buying flowers for their wives, visiting their relatives in the weekend. Ordinary people who show that even in hearts full of fear, there's still room for love and compassion. And that is worth fighting for. And to all those people and to their president, I want to say this. Yes, it's true that often, too often, you are forced to rely on each other, but you're not alone. There is a place for you in the hearts of so many people, here in the Netherlands, in the United States and all over the world. For Ukrainians who have turned their lives upside down to defend their country, who rush to help the victims of each new airstrike, who talk with government leaders and negotiate and show us that we can achieve what we can achieve when we stand up for the freedoms that President Roosevelt spoke about. 4 freedoms, which I feel can be summed up in the freedom to be who you are, here and in a free and autonomous Ukraine. President Zelensky, dear Volodymyr, this award is for your country, for you as president, and for all the Ukrainian people. And may I now ask Elizabeth Roosevelt Johnston to come forward? Yes. May I ask you to come? Oh no, sorry. Really? May I ask you to come forward to present this Medal of Honor to President Zelensky and Volodymyr? May I invite you to come up to accept the award as well, Mr. President?
Thank you so much. Your Majesty, Your Royal Highness, dear Prime Minister, dear friends, dear Netherlands, thank you for your attention and support for our people, for Ukraine, for what we are going through. Today in Ukraine is another very hard day, really hard night. The day after a massive Russian attack. In just one night, there were nearly 300 attack drones, 19 ballistic missiles, as well as cruise missiles. Air raid sirens sounded across many of our cities, and this came after waves of shaheeds had filled our skies just yesterday. Dozens of people have been injured, and sadly, so sadly, there are also lives lost in Odessa, Kiev, in Dnipro. Just ordinary people, children, civilians killed by Russian madness. If it's possible, please, I ask you now to honor their memory and all those whose lives have been taken by this terrible war with a minute of silence. Thank you so much. Thank you. This is impossible to accept. No rational person can accept it. Russia's war against our people, against Ukraine, and against the basic principles of normal human life is now in its 5th year. A full-scale war started by one man, only one person, in Moscow, who wanted total control. In the past, when such wars began or were only imagined, one could say that this was an unprecedented moment in history, when such great evil threatened everyone, and when every nation had to decide how to act. But today, this is definitely not unprecedented. We have seen this before: aggressive, unjust, terror-driven, full-scale wars that leave behind ruins and dark chapters in history. Putin knows exactly what he is doing, exactly, and who he resembles. And he is rightly compared to Nazis. He has the same expansionist ambitions. He wants to decide the fate of nations and whether they have the right to exist at all. And at the core of Russia's war against Ukraine is a false claim that Ukraine does not exist, that it is allegedly a part of Russia. And this is not just about history, not just politics, or not just ideology. It's the basis of their goal to erase Ukraine completely. And not only Ukraine. Russia has openly, repeatedly said it wants to control all its neighbors. It wants to decide what security in Europe should look like and whether it should exist at all. Russia has carried its war ideas as far as Syria and Africa. And this is a truly global threat. And it matters that many in the world see it exactly this way, as a global threat. When the full-scale war began, we heard really different reactions, and some were afraid of what would come next day, next moment. Some waited to see whether Ukrainians would withstand the first strikes, and only then decided whether to help. But there were also those who understood it immediately, and people like that, those who called evil by its name, were the majority, and you were among them. Among those who understood immediately, among those who stepped forward to help. Among those who are now helping with true leadership, and I'm grateful to you for your support. I'm grateful that the Netherlands truly stands for the protection of life. Thank you. Thanks to your people. Thank you so much. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, the world didn't look away from this war. It did not hand Ukraine over to a predator. And that has changed a lot, not only, by the way, not only for Ukraine. I'm convinced that because of this, we still live in a world that is not divided among predators. A world still built on the values of freedom and respect for human life. Yes, wars continue. Sadly, people are still dying. Yes, we often hear that international law and the global order are broken, but there is still a clear majority of nations that recognize that war is not normal, killing people is not normal, and aggression and violence must be stopped. People feel this, really, and the fact that people care, that countries care, that you care, gives us all a real chance. A chance that one day the world will no longer be a victim of wars. That one day the world will have a system, military, political and legal, strong enough to restrain aggressors. That one day people will be able to say that at last we no longer have to fear ruins. This is fundamental freedom we still lack. Freedom from ruins. Freedom from those who bring ruins. Freedom from those who seek to destroy everything that matters to normal people, to normal life. Freedom is never abstract. We must remember this. It's not something given. It's not something that exists in the air. Freedom is a condition people fight for themselves and for their children. It's a condition that must be protected, and it always requires a strong foundation, security, legal, cultural and educational, and also something deeper, something people feel. A foundation that makes it clear evil will be punished. Punished, absolutely. And this is crucial. Why do wars return? Because those who start them believe they will not be punished. That's why it's not enough when history judges only with truth. Not enough when memory alone delivers judgment. There must be law. There must be international law. There must be the international community enforcing it. And we must achieve this. And this is what we are working on, including with the Netherlands. We are working so that no victim of Russian aggression is left without a just response to the aggressor. Yes, it's critically important that you and our other partners continue to support us with weapons, especially air defense is crucial. It's important that together we can stop this war and that diplomacy can work. It's important that pressure on Russia continues, sanctions and all other restrictions. But it's just as important that Russia is held accountable for this aggression, legally and practice. And that Russian war criminals do not enjoy normal life, but face fair sentences. This is necessary, just as it was necessary after the Second World War. And this is what we are doing here in Europe. Here in the Netherlands, we are working to launch the tribunal for Russia's aggression against Ukraine, and I thank you for your help. We are working to ensure that the international legal system is firm and uncompromising toward Russian war criminals. Please support this, and please remember, all freedoms are fragile without the most basic freedom, freedom from ruins. Without basic security, and when those who start wars feel no accountability. So do not let Russia go unpunished. Thank you so much. Slava Ukraine! Thank you so much.
Eleanor Roosevelt once said that human rights begin close to home, in our streets and neighborhoods, in our schools and communities, in the way we treat each other every single day. And this is why, for the first time, the Roosevelt Foundation is proud to present the Youth for Freedom Award. The Youth for Freedom Award honors young people in the Netherlands who are standing up for the four freedoms. Young individuals who inspire others to speak out and make a difference. And this is exactly the purpose of Deel de Duif, Share the Dove of Peace. Deel de Duif shows us that the four freedoms begin with small, meaningful actions. Through open dialogue, the initiators discovered that Muslims and Jews have far more in common than what divides them. They did not keep this discovery for themselves, but decided to share it with the rest of the country. They show us that the four freedoms do not begin somewhere else, not by someone else. They begin with us, close to home.
De kloof is breed en lijkt niet te overbruggen. Maar af en toe gloort er een sprankje hoop.
De eerste keer dat ik iets hoopvol zag was eigenlijk Deel de Duif. 4 jonge mensen, 2 met islamitische achtergrond, 2 met Joodse achtergrond. En ik dacht, wat zijn jullie moedig.
In de ambtswoning van Femke Halsema. En daar waren wij alle 4. En na afloop raakte ik in gesprek met Selma. En toen vroeg ik aan haar hoe het voor haar nu is om een hoofddoek te dragen. Waarna ze mij vertelde, nou, het is best eng en spannend. En mensen beschouwen me opeens als terrorist. En ik word bekeken. En ik vond het heel naar om te horen. En tegelijkertijd herkende ik dat. Omdat ik een ketting met mijn naam in het Hebreeuws heb. Die ik ook liever niet meer droeg. En dat ik ook over straat liep met angst.
Monsters zijn jullie! Monster! Merry Christmas!
De zorgen zijn toch echt dat de islamitische en de Joodse gemeenschap zich in Nederland gewoon niet veilig voelen. En echt actief denken van waar moeten we heen als het hier niet goed gaat of als we hier niet meer mogen zijn. En daar focussen we ons ook op. Gewoon op de verbinding hier.
Hoe is de discussie onderling dan? Er zijn mensen die helemaal als vrijheidsstrijders noemen. Er zijn mensen die het een terroristische organisatie noemen. Zijn dat onderwerpen waarvan jullie zeggen, ja, daar hebben we even geen zin in en die laten we gaan?
Nee. We hebben het er zeker over. En woorden doen ertoe. En we hebben echt wel hele moeilijke gesprekken gevoerd. Maar wel op een hele respectvolle manier. Waarin we echt probeerden de ander te begrijpen. Ook al draait mijn maag om.
De truc zit hem echt in juist vragen, wat bedoel je daarmee? Of waarom zeg je dat? Of gewoon aangeven van, oh, dat komt op deze manier bij mij binnen. Daar heb ik best wel moeite mee.
Onze meningen verschillen alle 4 als het gaat over de situatie daar. Maar als we kijken naar Nederland, waar nu ook heel veel gebeurt, zijn we het over heel veel dingen en bijna alles wel eens. Want we willen niet dat er hier een oorlog gaat woekeren. We willen niet dat elk van ons met angst over straat moet lopen. En polarisatie tegengaan is iets wat we allemaal willen. Maar in je eentje los je dat weinig tot niet op. En dan moet je arm in arm gaan staan.
Vanuit Deel de Duif krijgen we zelfs op eigenlijk die best wel aardige boodschap die we hebben, krijgen we reacties zoals dat de duif bewerkt is en onthoofd is. En haatcomments uit onze community.
Wat er in een van de gastlessen is gezegd van, nou, leefde Adolf Hitler nog maar. Dat is heel pijnlijk.
Ja, het doel met Deel de Duif is inderdaad dat je het gesprek met elkaar aan blijft gaan. Dus dat je elkaar als mens ziet en voor vol aanziet. Ook al hebben we andere meningen. En dat je ook inziet dat er meerdere waarheden naast elkaar kunnen bestaan. Dat is eigenlijk wat wij heel erg proberen over te brengen in wat wij doen als we voor de lessen staan, als we dialogen organiseren. Ga het gesprek met elkaar aan en respecteer de ander. Stel onderzoekende vragen, juist als het pijnlijk wordt en als het persoonlijk wordt.
Het gaf ons hoop om met elkaar te praten. En dat wilden we heel graag naar elkaar, of naar buiten eigenlijk ook gaan brengen. Want als wij het kunnen, waarom kunnen anderen dat dan niet?
Members of the Roosevelt Academy and family, esteemed laureates, ladies and gentlemen. There's something strange about time. One day you go to school feeling forever young, and the next day you suddenly realize you have exactly the same age as the Prime Minister. And yes, Mr. Jetten, I'm very aware of the fact that you are indeed a young Prime Minister. However, the beauty of getting a little bit older is that people from the next generation suddenly surprise you with their wisdom and courage. Those two words, wisdom and courage, apply to Deel de Duif. In times of war, polarization, and great turmoil, it's always easier to choose sides. To be either 100% in favor of one case or completely against it. When you show any kind of compassion for the so-called other side, you are easily called a traitor, or even much worse. The members of Deel de Duif might not always completely agree of what's happening in the Middle East, but they do listen to each other instead of just shouting their bold opinions. They show us that engaging in dialogue is not naive at all, but it's the greatest strength we have. They don't just do this, they also teach adults and young people all over the country how to persuade and communicate in a respectful manner on sensitive topics like Muslim bigotry and anti-Semitism, subjects that should not be sensitive but still are. They truly believe in equality and peace, have the strength to be vulnerable, and they give us hope in times of darkness. Therefore, it's a great honor to present Deel de Duif the very first Youth for Freedom Award. Please come on the stage.
Members of the Roosevelt family, esteemed laureates, and dear everyone. We are incredibly thankful to the Roosevelt Foundation for this great honor. Some people say dialogue is naive, that it doesn't solve any real problems. They should try it. Because dialogue, as opposed to a debate, is not something you win. Your perspective does not overtake the others, it broadens yours. You make their story part of your own. Dialogue, if you do it right, is painful and confronting. But it does not only solve conflict, it prevents it. And sometimes, like in our case, it brings friendship.
Dialogue, obviously, is not something you can do on your own. And neither is winning a prize. We would like to thank, first and foremost, Noah 1000, whose curiosity and boldness started this journey. Thank you, Noah. We'd also like to thank our logistical superhero, Hanna van Helden, our advisory board and its chairwoman, Karin van Gennep, and of course, our family and friends who stood by our side these last years.
Finally, we would want to dedicate this award to all the young people we have met through the years. Time and again, they have shown how openly they can engage in conversation and how easily they broaden their perspectives.
So, by dedicating this prize to the young, we would like to address the old, or slightly older, in and outside of this room. Please, give young people a platform. Let them participate equally in conversations about peace and freedom. Take them seriously. We need their ideas, their energy, and their hope for new, better beginnings. Thank you.
Last year was the deadliest year ever for our profession.
We need journalists. We all need journalism. We need access to accurate information to be able to live our lives freely and safely. Journalists are often the first people to be attacked when democracy declines, because speaking the truth is a dangerous undertaking when those in power wish to suppress it. CPJ's original mission to defend and protect journalists, and in so doing to protect freedom of expression and press freedom, is more important than ever before. Now journalists are under threat not just in authoritarian regimes. They're not just under threat when they report in dangerous situations like war or conflict. They're at risk reporting on politics in democracies. They're at risk reporting on their local communities. They're at risk reporting on everything from climate change to the economy. If journalists are silenced, we don't have access to even that most basic information, and we certainly don't have access to the kinds of information that those with power seek to hide from us: corruption, wrongdoing. The increased numbers of journalists in jail, the rising number of journalists harassed, the rising number of journalists being killed, they are all indicators that something much bigger is happening in terms of our individual freedoms and liberties. Over the past 2 years, we've seen the deadliest assault on journalists that the Committee to Protect Journalists has ever documented. In 2025 alone, 129 journalists and media workers were killed worldwide, majority of them Palestinian journalists. We are reliant on them for information about what's happening inside Gaza. Those journalists are not only documenting that suffering, they are experiencing that suffering themselves. Our job at CPJ is to document each and every single one of those deaths, just as we document each and every single one of the arrests of journalists we see worldwide, to pursue justice for those journalists in order so that that does not happen again. Getting justice for murdered journalists is extremely difficult because very often the very individuals, the perpetrators of those crimes against journalists, are also those who are in power, those who have the ability to investigate and to hold individuals to account. We know from talking to journalists who've been in prison, for example, that simply knowing that there is somebody else out there rooting for you, that has your back, that is supporting you, that continues to advocate on your behalf, helps people get through. I would love a world where CPJ no longer existed, where journalists were safe and could work without fear of harm, no matter where they were in the world, no matter what subjects they covered.
Your Majesty, Your Royal Highness, ladies and gentlemen, it's been 2 years since my father, Dirk, who defended journalism until his very last day, had the same honor of presenting the Freedom of Speech Award. The bitter reality is, though, that since then, the world has become an even more dangerous place for those who dare to speak the truth. I've just returned from Ukraine, where local journalists risk their life every single day, reporting on the Russian shelling. In Russia itself, reporters are jailed for something as simple as calling the war a war. In Iran, Sudan, Belarus, and even across the ocean in America, reporters are under pressure, threatened, and silenced. And no place is more dangerous for journalists than Palestine, where my colleagues are routinely targeted for trying to tell the world what is happening. I could never do justice to all these stories, but thankfully, there is the Committee to Protect Journalism, CPJ, a lifeline for reporters everywhere, no matter how big or small their platform, how global or local their story. CPJ gives a name and voice to the silenced and fights for those who can no longer speak for themselves. It is thanks to CPJ that we know at least 129 media workers were killed in 2025 simply for doing their job, a record number since the group first started their count. Let that figure sink in for a moment, and let it remind us why CPJ's mission matters and why we must do all our part to ensure that such a grim milestone is never reached again. It is my immense privilege to invite Jody Ginsburg, CPJ's fearless CEO, to come on stage to receive this award.
Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Committee to Protect Journalists, I am honoured to accept this year's Four Freedoms Award for freedom of speech. All of us here in this room, no matter who we are, whether king or courtier, president or citizen, all of us need information. Freedom of expression, the ability to seek, receive and impart information is the cornerstone of all other freedoms. For months, as we navigated an unprecedented pandemic, journalists dove in, counting the dead when governments wouldn't. They shed light on the human devastation and unraveled the science, helping us to keep safe. For the past 4 years, it is mainly Ukrainian journalists who have documented the impact of Russia's full-scale invasion. For the last 2.5 years, it is Palestinian journalists alone who have borne witness to the genocide in Gaza. And it is journalists everywhere who for decades have helped expose wrongdoing and political malpractice, social injustice and climate catastrophe. As technology makes lies and falsehoods easier to sow and spread and harder to sift fact from fiction, the need for trustworthy information becomes ever more important.
Yet those very individuals and institutions on whom we rely for discovering and disseminating that information are under attack like never before. Journalists are smeared as enemies of the people. They are branded as criminals, then treated as such. They are sent death threats online and physically attacked off it. They are spied on, jailed, and killed. And in the vast majority of cases, those responsible for attacks on journalists are never held accountable. For 45 years, CPJ has documented threats against journalists, undertaken advocacy on behalf of journalists at risk, and provided direct assistance to help keep journalists safe and reporting. That work has never been more urgent. Last year, as you heard, was the deadliest on record. At least 129 journalists and media workers killed worldwide. More than 300 journalists were in jail, more than double the number of just a decade ago. We cannot allow this to stand. Press freedom is our freedom, and we must all stand firm in its defense, no matter where journalists are attacked. Silence is not an option. No one knows this better than our colleagues in Palestine. And that is why I'm honoured to stand alongside Ashraf Mashhawari today and to dedicate this award to all those journalists who risk everything to report the truth.
Thank you. Your Majesty, Your Royal Highness, Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, this recognition matters to us as Palestinian journalists from Gaza. But I stand here today with more than gratitude. I carry the names of the colleagues we have lost. More than 260 Palestinian journalists have been killed over the past 2 years in Israeli attacks in Gaza. Gaza is a small place. So most of us know each other. So every loss was never just a number. It was someone we knew. It was a family. It was a mother. It was a child living with that loss. I have heard those voices, children asking their parents not to continue, afraid it will take them away. Why this is happening? To silence the truth. And when international journalists are denied access to Gaza, and Palestinian journalists are left alone under fire, the truth itself is under threat. We know that, what the silence means, so we continued. Because journalism is not a crime. If we stop, silence wins. And that's why we are facing a dangerous pattern, one that must never be normalized. If this becomes normal, journalism everywhere is at risk. And that's why the work of CPJ has been essential in making sure we weren't alone. History will not ask what we knew. It will ask what we choose to accept to be normal. That's not only our reality. It is a test for all of us. Thank you very much.
every blessing. I wish every persecuted believer in the world what I long for myself: safety, dignity, and freedom.
Members of the Roosevelt family, esteemed laureates, dear all. Everyone has the right to freedom of thought, conscience and religion. And this right includes freedom to change his religion or belief, and freedom, either alone or in community with others and in public or in private, to manifest his religion or belief in teaching, practice, worship and observance. So says the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. This freedom of worship, including the freedom to worship no supreme body at all, is one of the cornerstones of today's human rights edifice. Nonetheless, for many believers and non-believers in many countries, daily life differs radically from these solemn words, as we just heard in this powerful testimony. The freedom of worship has always been a vulnerable human right. Among the first 6 prisoners of conscience from whom Amnesty International campaigned in 1961 were 3 clergymen, 2 Catholic dignitaries from Czechoslovakia and Hungary, and 1 Quaker minister for the United States whose religion inspired his activism for racial equality. Violation of the freedom of worship often go hand in hand with other serious human rights violations, like racial or ethnicity-based discrimination, apartheid, and even the death penalty for acts that neither harm nor wrong any other person, acts like enmity against God, and other overly broad or vaguely worded alleged criminal acts with a religious aspect. Especially in relation to this last category of alleged crimes, it is important to remember that the freedom of worship protects the believers and their religious practices, not their belief or religion per se, nor any supreme being. Central to the freedom of worship are individual human beings and their communities. And although international human rights instruments do not preclude the possibility of a state religion or a state church system, the days of the principle of the religious peace are long gone. That principle, formulated 5 centuries ago and summarized as cuius regio eius religio, or whose realm his religion, meant, in short, that a prince or territorial ruler in the Holy Roman Empire would determine the religion of its territory. Its inhabitants would have the choice of accepting the prince's religion or leaving the princedom. Nowadays, after many religious wars, a state-church system is not contrary to international human rights, as long as the state does not discriminate against those who live their lives according to the rules of another religion or worldview. And this brings me to another important aspect of the freedom of worship, important also from a communal point of view, the freedom to change one's religion. This freedom, together with the freedom of expression, which includes the freedom to receive and impart information and ideas, protects us from religious tyranny. But it also helps us, individually and in the communities in which we live, to prevent that we close our minds for valuable ideas that might seem unwelcome at first. It protects us from closing windows of opportunity to learn about alternative ways of living our lives, to think along different lines, to worship in other ways, celebrating the freedom to change one's religion. Whether we exercise it or not, protects us, individually and collectively, from intolerance and xenophobia. The freedom of worship protects us all, believers and non-believers alike, against closing our minds. And today I wanted to share that reflection. And while doing so, I see before me an empty chair. The chair for a laureate who, for now, cannot be named, from a country that should not be mentioned, for the reasons of the laureate's personal security. It reminds us of the vulnerability of the freedoms we are celebrating today. And since these freedoms were an important impetus for the international human rights system developed after World War II, this empty chair should also remind us of the dangers that will befall us all, as nations and individuals, if we neglect, deny, or ignore the international rules and institutions that were established after enormous human suffering. Rules and institutions to make this world a safer place for all of us. They deserve the best defense that we have to offer in these unruly times. Thank you.
Vreemde hier, ik heb mijn land gelost. Ik heb jouw pad gekruist, ik heb jouw spoor gevolgd. Je had gezegd, ga terug, je moet niet op mij vertrouwen. Maar jij bent deel van mij, hoe kan ik zonder jou? En de toekomst is onzeker en het donker is dichtbij. En ik weet, ons wacht een lange reis, recht door die woestijn. Recht door die woestijn. Maar jouw land is mijn land, jouw volk is mijn volk, jouw taal is mijn taal en jouw God is mijn God en jouw droom is mijn droom, jouw pad is mijn pad, jouw toekomst. Mijn toekomst en jouw hart is mijn hart. En ik weet, jouw volk is bang, omdat wij anders zijn. Maar ik zal bruggen bouwen, daar waar die afgrond is. En ik zal terug verlangen, wanneer de wind zal waaien. Die uit het noorden komt, van mijn geboortegrond. Maar ik zal sterk zijn en ik zal doorgaan, want ik wil naast jou staan, al zal dit moeilijk zijn. Al zal dit moeilijk zijn, want jouw land is mijn land en jouw volk is mijn volk. Jouw taal is mijn taal en jouw God is jouw God en jouw deel is mijn deel. En mijn brood is jouw brood, jouw leven, mijn leven. En mijn dood is jouw dood. En wanneer het donker komt en jouw mensen mij ontwijken, zal ik mijn liefde geven totdat die haat verdwijnt. Totdat die haat verdwijnt. Want jouw huis is mijn huis. Jouw angst is mijn angst. Jouw stilte, mijn stilte. En jouw land is mijn land.
proud about my disability. I'm not ashamed of, and I don't have to hide anymore. That's the biggest thing that I could be proud of it. I start to feel excluded like from a very young age in basic things. I started to feel like I'm not belonging anywhere. Like, what happened with myself? I want to change. I don't want to have this disability because I don't feel acceptance in my environment. And even when I start like telling to the authorities, not only to my parents, but the authorities at the school, they said that it was my fault. We don't accept children like this because they have a lot of problems and we have to invest a lot, that we decided to cut all the relationship with the school and I leave the system. I've never like questioned myself why things happen to people with disabilities, why we have to live differently and feeling discrimination as the norm for us. So that's why I decided to like do it like collectively and started like creating innovation for people with disabilities. I wanted to find the light on that darkness and do the difference, but I want to also do concrete things. So I used that platform to start doing projects, to start connecting with others, to start getting involved in the UN system to make the difference. So I started like developing this web platform with the idea in mind of making a safe space for people to find information, but at the same time a space to empower others in inclusion and make them understand that the change is going to be possible only if everyone gets involved. And with la ICT Incluye, as an Instagram page, have like more than 100,000 followers on Instagram, and 100 people just applied to be part of the volunteering. And I said, okay, so let's start to work. But with the time, I understand that maybe we are not going to do the biggest changes from night to day, but we can make little changes. Start with little movements. Small steps are important to see the difference. Go to schools, teaching through the scholar community why inclusion is important, making the difference in the companies, making the difference with the local authorities in our public spaces. If you involve yourself, you maybe can start opening opportunities in labor, in entertainment, and even in make someone's a better day. It gives me hope that inclusion is going to be a practice and not just a promise, because I see that we are making noise and very loud.
Your Majesties, Mr. President, members of the Roosevelt family, ladies and gentlemen, do you remember that moment at school that you wanted to join and someone said to you, not you, not now? Do you remember how that felt? And maybe you pushed it aside and moved further. But what if it happens again and again and again? What do you do then? This is a daily struggle for more than 1 billion people with a disability in the world. What we see at school, at work, on screen, shapes what we believe is normal. But it's not the reality, because people with a disability are too often left aside. And that is exactly what people like Isidora challenge. She makes visible what too often remains unseen and invites us to look again, to question what we think is normal, and to take responsibility for the world we are shaping every single day. Freedom means living in a world that is designed for all of us, where strength of society is not measured by promises, but what it truly makes possible for people. Thankfully, we have Isidora. By being active for the UN, starting a platform for people with a disability, and sharing her daily life online, she is not only raising awareness, she shows the world what inclusion truly means. And doing so, she brings us closer to the promise of freedom for all. Querida Isidora, igual que tú, yo también he pasado un parte de mis años más jóvenes en América Latina. En Colombia, sé por experiencia propia lo difícil que es la lucha. Pero eso te admiro profundamente. He visto en tu Instagram que muchas personas te preguntan, ¿y sí? ¿Qué tú tienes? Y tú respondes con una broma. Tengo amigos, tengo un pero. A partir de ahora también puedes decir, tengo el Roosevelt Freedom from Want Award. Muchísimas felicidades. Muy bonita. Muy bonita.
Ah, yes. Dear all, well, I came from a land that has been called so many times the end of the world, a place which name is often translated as the deepest place on earth, Chile, that is not only shaped by its distance, it is also shaped by resilience and possibility. And yet, I never imagined I would be one day here with all of you. I would like to tell you something. We often said that it's important to look to the future, to move on, right? To not stay stuck in the past. But for me, it's impossible to talk about inclusion and the changes that we're making without reminding me my past. When I was 12, I lived something that truly changed me. Bullying. You should be grateful to be here, because people like you don't study, or you are never going to have friends because of your difference. You are never belong to any place. That's our quotes that I've received from professors of the school that exclude me and make me suffer bullying. Rights that are treated as privilege make the problem. Make that we suffer exclusion as part of the system. But I was one of the fortunates. that have parents that are here between in the public, Pamela and Juan Andres. My parents stood by me and challenged the system for my education. But I said fortunate, yes, because I'm one of the lucky cases. Access to education and opportunities is still being a privilege. And when rights are treated as privilege, we are truly doing bad things. Exclusion often begins with misinformation, right? But I would say it's sustained by systems that are not designed for everyone. And even when a student, as me, leaves the school for a period, they said, we choose to leave. But that's very far from truth, because that empty chair means a lost opportunity, a voice unheard, and also a future that was cut, even didn't have the chance to grow. So from that, when I finally have the opportunity to be part of a school, Institución Teresiana, that makes me feel comfortable, secure, and being part of it, for me, it then appears a light. I understand that it's a responsibility from my side to make a difference. Because no one should be left behind for a condition they just born with it, and they did not choose. Inclusion is not only for excluded, it's for everyone here in this room. It's for everyone worldwide. It benefits to all of us, and it allows us to be with our circumstances, with our differences, being part of the state, and can raise our voice freely. That's why I founded Encuentra tu Lugar, or Find Your Place for the bilinguals, because real change must start not only for helping individuals, not just stopped in charity, but also transforming our society and the places that we want to be better. Today, young people across my country, Chile, is making the difference, transforming exclusion into opportunities and barriers into concrete change, in which we see diversity as the characteristics that strengthen us. Because inclusion is not something that we are waiting for. We know that the system already failed to all of us, but we decided to stop only looking Instagram, TikTok, and really make a change our system. And now my invitation is with all of you. We are not doing this alone. Yes, we are young people, we have our voice, but we need all of you. Public sector, Prime Minister, private sector, civil society in general. Because we cannot wait anymore for changes. If we have the possibility, if we have the privilege to be here with all of you, we must do it together. Because a world where everyone with a difference is excluded, it's not a free word. And freedom, and this word, it means that everyone needs to live with dignity. Because freedom is for all of us. Thank you.
Si j'avais un moment de difficulté, j'ai tenu bon, j'ai raconté ma vie, mon parcours de vie, ce que j'avais, la douleur que j'avais en moi par rapport à ce que ces hommes m'avaient fait. Parce que j'ai cité cette phrase en disant que j'avais été sacrifiée sur l'autel du vice. C'est vrai qu'il faut vraiment réfléchir, parce que cette honte, elle nous colle à la peau et on a du mal à avancer. Et au regard des autres aussi, on se sent pas bien, on se sent sale. Toute cette boue que vous avez en vous, elle vous colle, oui, ça vous colle pendant des mois. Et je pense que c'est la plupart de ce que ressentent les victimes. C'est vrai que ce procès aura quand même libéré la parole des femmes. Ça, j'en suis persuadée. Aujourd'hui, les femmes osent parler. Le lieutenant Perret me dit, Madame Pellicot, ce dossier, il y avait une pile de dossiers dans le bureau. Il me dit, ça concerne votre mari. Et là, il me montre une photo, 2 photos, je ne me reconnais pas. Je ne reconnais pas cette femme. Et il me dit, mais c'est votre chambre, c'est bien votre table de nuit, on a perquisité, c'est bien vous. Et là, je crois que mon cerveau a fait une dissociation, c'est-à-dire que je ne réalisais pas, en fait. J'ai mis beaucoup de temps à réaliser que M. Pellicot m'avait violée et fait violer. Donc ça aussi, ça a été pour moi un long chemin, une descente aux enfers, une déflagration. J'explique l'image parce que c'est imagé quand je dis que je me suis pris un TGV plein de figures, c'est-à-dire que je suis totalement détruite. Il faut savoir qu'au départ, je n'avais pas envie qu'on me voie, qu'on me connaisse. Je voulais m'isoler. C'est ce que j'ai fait d'ailleurs pendant quelques temps. J'en avais parlé auparavant aussi avec mes enfants, surtout ma fille, qui m'avait dit « Maman, ça serait bien que tu t'opposes à ce huis clos parce que tu vas faire un cadeau magistral à tous ces accusés. » Donc dans ma tête, tout ça, j'ai mûrement réfléchi, la réflexion s'imposait aussi. Et je me suis dit qu'elle avait raison. Je vais m'opposer à ce huis clos. Je vais affronter ces individus. Mais il a fallu tenir bon. Je pensais pas que j'allais tenir toute cette période parce qu'au départ, j'étais venue que pour 15 jours. J'avais décidé avec mes avocats qu'on viendrait 15 jours, que j'allais repartir. Et quand j'ai vu toutes ces femmes arriver au fur et à mesure dans cette salle des pas perdus qui sont venues me soutenir, je me suis sentie investie d'une responsabilité. Je me suis dit que je ne pouvais plus partir parce qu'elles étaient là pour moi et je me devais être là pour elles aussi. Et il est vrai que j'avais les regards de ces individus parce que la salle était petite. Et j'avais ces regards qui étaient là pour me provoquer, pour me déstabiliser. Mais ils voulaient que je baisse les yeux. Et c'est moi qui soutenais leur regard. Et ça, j'ai eu cette force-là pour aller au bout de ce procès. Là, ça a été aussi un deuxième viol pour moi de visionner ces vidéos. Parce que je n'avais pas de conscience quand ils m'ont violée. J'ai vécu des anesthésies générales. J'explique aussi mes absences, mes problèmes gynécologiques. Mais là, oui, c'était violent pour moi parce qu'ils avaient en face d'eux, on les voyait en train de me violer. Et quand le président disait « Monsieur Untel, avez-vous violé Madame Pellicot ?» il disait « Non, je n'ai pas violé Madame Pellicot. » Le premier jour, c'était très calme. Et quand j'ai commencé à entendre ces applaudissements, voir le nom Gisèle, merci Gisèle, les chœurs, c'est ce que j'ai dit, j'étais contente d'offrir mon histoire en exemple et mon prénom en étendard. Ça, j'en ai vraiment, parce que grâce à ces femmes qui m'ont soutenue. Sans ces applaudissements, alors je les ai pas réclamés, loin de là. Mais j'ai vu aussi que ce procès faisait écho à leur souffrance. Elles se sont identifiées à mon histoire. Et je pense que c'était le combat de toutes ces femmes. C'était mon procès, mais c'était aussi le leur. Je pense que j'ai beaucoup de femmes que je rencontre encore aujourd'hui de dire vous êtes une icône. Je préfère le mot symbole au repère. C'est-à-dire qu'on se souviendra de ce procès. Si ça permet de libérer la parole des femmes, j'ai apporté ma pierre à l'édifice. Et pour que le combat continue contre toutes ces violences. Ou plutôt ça.
Ladies and gentlemen, today I stand before you not only to honor an extraordinary woman, Gisèle Pellicot, but to share why her courage resonates so deeply with me and with millions around the world. Gisèle Pellicot is a symbol of something very, very powerful. The courage to stand in the light after enduring darkness. Her story is not just one of survival, but it's one of transformation, reclaiming your own dignity and challenging a culture that often protects silence instead of the truth. And this is so personal for me. I was raised in a family with extreme violence. My mother was beaten and raped by someone who was supposed to love and protect her. Like so many victims, she carried not only the pain, but also the weight of the shame. And that is why Giselle Pellico's voice matters so much. Because statistically, we know this is not rare. 1 in 3 women will experience sexual or physical violence in their lifetime. 1 in 3, so many in this room. And behind that number are real people, mothers, daughters, friends, and many of whom will carry this silence and this shame for years and years, and sometimes even a lifetime. But Giselle Pellico has changed something fundamentally. By speaking out and giving up being anonymous, by facing the world with the truth instead of fear, she sent a message that echoes so far beyond her own story. The shame does not belong to the victim. The shame belongs to the predator. And that message is revolutionary. The Franklin Roosevelt Freedom for Fear Award honors those who confront fear and help others rise above it. And in that spirit and his vision of a world free from fear, Giselle Pellico has given that freedom a new and urgent meaning. She has given survivors permission to speak. She has given society a reason to listen. And she has given people hope, people like my mother, and so many others that were missing something so long: validation, dignity, and hope. Giselle Pellico does not only earn and deserve this award, you, for me, are the embodiment of this award, Giselle. I am so proud of you, and I would like to welcome you on the stage.
Membres de la famille Roosevelt, mesdames et messieurs, c'est avec beaucoup d'émotion, mais aussi un profond sentiment d'humilité et de responsabilité que je prends la parole devant vous. Avoir le droit de vivre à l'abri de la peur est une idée simple, presque évidente. Et pourtant, pour beaucoup, cette idée reste encore aujourd'hui hors d'atteinte. Pour les victimes de violences sexuelles et de genre, la peur est souvent silencieuse, intime. Elle se vit loin des regards et peut prendre de multiples formes. La peur de parler, la peur de ne pas être cru, la peur du regard des autres et en définitive, la peur d'exister. Avec la peur viennent souvent, très souvent, la honte, puis le silence. Un silence imposé, parfois intériorisé. Comme si la violence subie devait être cachée, comme si c'était aux victimes de porter seules le poids de ce qui leur était imposé. Si j'ai fait le choix d'accepter ce prix, c'est pour pouvoir l'offrir symboliquement à toutes les victimes de ces violences. À celles qui ont parlé tout autant qu'à celles qui se taisent encore. À toutes, je veux dire que même si elles sont isolées, elles ne seront jamais seules, car nous sommes des millions à avoir connu cette violence ou y être encore confrontés aujourd'hui.
Leur dire qu'elles possèdent des ressources qu'elles ne soupçonnent pas et qu'elles doivent croire en leur capacité à surmonter cette épreuve, même lorsqu'il semble qu'il n'y ait aucun espoir de s'en sortir. Mais pour que les victimes puissent parler et demander de l'aide, il faut qu'en face, la société soit prête à les écouter et à leur tendre la main. C'est pourquoi je souhaite également dédier ce prix à toutes celles et ceux qui œuvrent chaque jour pour accompagner les victimes et faire reculer la violence sexuelle et de genre, acceptant ainsi de se confronter à leurs souffrances et à ne pas détourner le regard. Leur courage et leur dévouement doivent aussi être reconnus, car cet engagement implique souvent d'importants sacrifices. Enfin, je souhaite également dédier ce prix à toutes celles et ceux, trop nombreux, qui n'ont pas survécu à ces violences et dire qu'ici, que nous ne pourrons jamais les oublier. Mes pensées vont à leurs proches et à toutes celles et ceux qui font vivre leur mémoire pour que leur perte ne reste pas vaine. J'ai la conviction profonde que vaincre les violences sexuelles et de genre est possible, mais ce combat est générationnel. Il ne pourra se gagner que si chaque génération transmet la suivante les progrès qu'elle aura permis d'accomplir. Mes derniers mots seront pour nos jeunes générations, qui sont l'avenir. À celles et ceux qui grandissent aujourd'hui, qui refusent la banalisation des violences, qui osent parler, qui osent écouter, vous êtes déjà une part de la solution. Vous portez une exigence nouvelle, celle d'un monde où la peur n'a plus sa place. C'est en vous que réside l'espoir que cette liberté devienne enfin une réalité et que plus personne n'ait à apprendre à vivre avec la peur. Je vous remercie.
My grandparents would be the first to acknowledge that we live in a very troubled world. In such a world, the four freedoms can help us build the bridges of our common humanity.
Mine eyes have seen the glory.
I bring you greetings from my family, and it is such a distinct honor and privilege to do so. We are here today to honor the work of 5 remarkable individuals who have dedicated their lives to the 4 freedoms.
The grapes of wrath have been stored.
You had learned not to be intimidated by the forces of evil. Your spirit of tolerance remains a beacon of hope for humanity, and for this, we thank and honor you today.
It transfigures you and me, and as he died, glory, glory, hallelujah.
Let us remember the joy of these laureates' courage, not just their actions, but their love of humankind.
Hallelujah, oh, glory, 'cause my God.
We'll do this together. We can make a difference, from the small places close to home to the grand halls of decision. We will be together. always be Roosevelts who will come at your invitation to serve, to share a determination to live the four freedoms alongside the distinguished laureates who will always inspire and direct us.
Glory, glory,
freedom from want, freedom from fear, freedom of worship, and freedom of speech will triumph everywhere in the world. Thank you. Thank you. Your Majesty, Your Royal Highness, Mr. President, Mr. Prime Minister, King's Commissioner, inspiring laureates, and honored guests. On behalf of my family and our delegation from the United States, thank you once again for inviting us to be with you at the International Four Freedoms Awards. The partnership between the Roosevelt Foundation and the Roosevelt Institute is a powerful reminder of the enduring ties between the people of our two nations. And while it is many years ago now, our two families, it is a joy to be here with you today. And how moved we are by the laureates who just spoke. Your courage is remarkable. The Netherlands was a foundational part of my grandfather's story. My family's roots are here in the Netherlands and in this province. And it is deeply meaningful to see how that connection has endured as a living, evolving partnership grounded in shared principles of freedom and democracy. Those principles were the heart of his vision of democracy: freedom of speech and expression, freedom of worship, freedom from want, and freedom from fear. When my grandfather spoke about these freedoms in 1941, the future at home and abroad was fragile and uncertain. We in America forget that sometimes. But these principles were and still are a standard for how a democratic nation should treat its people and how it should project its power in the world. What strikes me is how relevant my grandfather's vision remains today. Our future is fragile. Around the world, as we have heard, journalists are still threatened, jailed, and killed. Religious minorities are persecuted. Disabled people lack access to what others take for granted. And women and children live in fear of those more powerful than they are. I don't think my grandfather thought that these freedoms would be achieved everywhere in his lifetime. He knew that they must be claimed and defended again and again in every generation. Today's laureates remind us that these freedoms of speech and worship from want and fear are not assumed. They depend on the courage and commitment of people willing to speak of them, to fight for them again and again. That is the rhythm of humanity, I suppose. But we cannot opt out because we are discouraged. My grandfather did not get discouraged because he and my grandmother believed deeply in democracy and in the right of all people to determine their own future. The four freedoms are the principles that drive toward that. While today, those principles again under threat, we see them being defended with extraordinary courage by many, most notably by President Zelensky and the people of Ukraine, who have stood firm in the face of immense sacrifice. Their fight is a daily reminder that the struggle for freedom is not confined to the past. It is as urgent today as it was 80 years ago, and it will always be urgent. An American journalist, Terry Moran, described democracy as vitality, as our voices, the voices of all, no matter their wealth or station or heritage. Now, when we in America gather to express our views in town squares and union halls, in the streets and in churches, we sing. Songs, no matter the quality of our tone, links us to history, brings us together, knits our emotions, and gives us energy and focus. One of those songs, a simple lyric and melody, I won't sing for you, by a young woman named Heidi Wilson, who's from the state of Vermont, near where I live, wrote a song called Hold On that everyone can sing, whether they've learned it or not. It goes like this: hold on, hold on, my dear ones, here comes the dawn. And sing it over and over again. It is deeply humbling and deeply encouraging to stand alongside all of you. I have no doubt that my grandfather, while he might be grieving for so much of what's going on around us, would be immensely inspired by the work being done by each of you. And he would send my grandmother to be with you. Thank you.
Dear Anne, thank you so much for your moving and inspiring words. You truly embody our fight for the 4 freedoms. And you have been, and always will be, a great friend and inspiration to us. You carry the legacy of your grandparents with grace and conviction. And in so many ways, you reflect the spirit of your grandmother, Eleanor. You even look like her. Thank you. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated while the royal family, the laureates and the presenters will leave the church soon. And then please follow the directions of our protocol assistants. And a few words to conclude this ceremony. I would like to thank all of the laureates and the presenters for their presence and their inspiring words. Your examples inspire us to advance the cause of the 4 freedoms. You remind us that we must continue to dedicate ourselves to the protection and the promotion of human rights for everyone, everywhere in the world. Thank you. Today, the laureates showed us their examples of courage. So let us also find the courage to do the right thing, to be concerned about our brothers and sisters, and to be involved in the struggle for freedom and human rights, far away and close at home.